We are all aware about the responsibilities that Mr. Ramesh Lakshminarayanan is holding at HDFC Bank as the CIO and the CISO of the bank. Starting with the further introductions.
Our first panelist is Mr. A.R. Vishwanathan, COO and Member of Board, Vara Technology Private Limited, consultative, meticulous and highly energized techno-functional professional. Mr. Vishwanathan has over 23 years of experience in diverse verticals of banking, technology, retail banking and investment banking. Prior to working with Vara Technology, he has worked with the companies such as WNS Global, Sintel, ABN AMRO, Standard Chartered Bank, eServe International and NCL. Thank you, sir, for joining us.
Our next panelist is Mr. Kunal Jain. He is currently the Chief Product Officer at JSW One Platform Limited. Mr. Jain, at JSW One, he's as JSW One MSME, a B2B marketplace, and JSW One Homes, tech-led home construction platform. Prior to this, he has 16 years of experience in tech and digital space. Mr. Jain was a principal at JSW Ventures, a tech venture capital fund. He was the founder of Tastebox Hospitality, which was a unique table reservation platform for top-of-the-line restaurants across India. Mr. Jain has also founded several other startups, namely Enthrall Media and IndiaHanger.com.
Our next panelist for the conclave is Mr. Mandar Kulkarni. He has over 25 years of experience and is currently working with Jio Platform Limited, India's leading digital and telecommunication platform company, to build India's largest cloud portfolio from edge to multi-cloud. He joined Jio from Microsoft, where he built Microsoft's cloud and data center business in India. Before that, Mr. Mandar was leading the cloud solutions architect team at Microsoft, focusing on partners and managing portfolio ranging from infrastructure to artificial intelligence. His earlier assignments has been as Senior Vice President, Solutions Engineering and Private Cloud Practice at NetMagic Solutions. He started his professional career with CMS Computers Limited, post which he worked at firms such as Tata Communications, CyberTech, Corliant, Indian Express, etc. Mr. Mandar's key area of strengths are creating new services and a scalable organization to support business growth. We welcome you, sir, to the IM Conclave.
Our next panelist is Mr. Pratik Singh. He is India head, creator of the ERP workflow business at ServiceNow. Mr. Singh has almost 2 decades of extensive and deep experience in building and scaling businesses through his career experience with organizations like ServiceNow, CA Technologies, Orange, and HCL. In his current role for the Creator and ERP Workflow BU, Mr. Singh is responsible for sales, ecosystems, and go-to-market strategy for the ServiceNow platform in APAC, specific to India. In addition, Mr. Jain is driving initiatives to expand the low-code creator platforms, low-code creator economy through hackathons, developer outreach, citizen development program, partner and alliances. And on a personal level, Mr. Jain is based in Mumbai and he loves to read and is an avid surfer. Let's give him a big round of applause.
Our next panelist is Mr. Vishal Shrimankar. He is Vice President and Strategic Business Change Manager at HSBC Wholesale Transformation. He has close to 2 decades of experience in leading and managing global change across sectors with a focus on financial services. He has worked across all aspects of change management, from program management and business analysis to organization design and process engineering. Sir, we welcome you to the IM and Business Analytics Conclave. We thank the entire panel for participating in this conclave. Professor Jha, we request you now to please take over and start the panel discussion.
Dear panelists, thank you so much for joining this panel discussion. And over the next 45, 50 minutes, we wanted to discuss the same theme of future-proofing of organizations. We hope to do 3 rounds of questions and answers. And it's so interesting that we have panelists coming from very different backgrounds. And I'm sure your perspectives are going to be very rich, and our students will take away a lot from this panel discussion. So I'll start with you, Mr. Vishal. Our first question in this is, we've all seen organizations navigate these tumultuous years of change, and you would have seen the organizations you work with go through these changing tumultuous times. So what did you see your organization or the organizations you work with do differently that helped them come out of the times that we've been through?
So, good morning, good afternoon to everybody. So it's a very interesting question, and the more you think about it, the point is that so much of things have changed over the last 3 years, and all credit, discredit to the pandemic. But a lot of very large things changed in the entire pandemic period. But there were very, very small things which nobody ever realized could go wrong, and it actually went wrong. And I'll give you a very classic example about our organization. So we are a 500-man organization. And very interestingly and not surprisingly, not everybody owns a laptop, right? So the moment the pandemic hit and we announced that we are all going to work from home, the first thing that we all did was scamper around for laptops because we wanted people to work. And we realized there are so many laptops in the market. So whether you buy it, rent it, it's just not available. So that was the first major hit that we saw as an organization, that even though we want people to work, unfortunately people couldn't work for the first 30 to 45 days from homes. That was the first thing. And the second thing, and probably much more than that, is the ability to really interact with your staff, right? You're used to face-to-face interactions, and the moment the pandemic hit, people went back to their homes, went back to their villages, hometowns, and wherever they used to stay and wherever they were comfortable. Issues of internet, because not everybody had an internet at home. Laptop obviously was a big issue. The ability to interact, connect, give work to people, check whether they are doing the work. All of these very, very small impacts made us realize that, hey, look, we are now living in a real world. This is not what we ever expected. This is not what we ever wanted. So for us as an organization, it has been a reality check. We come from a tech world assuming that everything is going to be tech driven, but very small things are often let off. And that was our personal learning out of this entire period, during which we realized we need to take care of small things as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Coming to you, Mr. Kunal, JSW and the JSW platform is being seen as a disruptor. I mean, at least in the sectors that you are initially targeting. Could you answer this question from the context of your platform, the change you're bringing? How did you see your organization go through the change?
Sure. It's an interesting question that you asked me, actually, because the disruption that we speak about is the reason why we exist as an organization. And when I speak about the organization, is JSW1. This isn't now an old story already. We're still in the pandemic, but we already have seen the impact of it, right? There was a lockdown. It completely changed the adoption curve for digital, right? Suddenly, the way people, individuals, and organizations, both small and large, conducted commerce, communicated, kept records, went through a change, right? There was a forced adoption. Now, of course, all this peaked during the COVID lockdowns, but what we've seen is that it did not baseline to the same levels as before. Organizations that took advantage of this, we've seen that they've thrived, right? The idea came from this, that there was a whole channel there was a whole customer segment, that we were not targeting, which was the small and mid-sized businesses. This was as JSW Group. These businesses were being driven by individuals who had suddenly seen an adoption curve for digital and were much more susceptible towards digitizing their businesses as well. This led to us creating a platform for them to procure commodities digitally. Not everything has changed. We still have a very offline business as well. Finally, logistics, fulfillment, quality, the availability of materials, the supply chain is still very offline. But I think we've accelerated by several years in the ability to actually capture users online. We are able to market to MSMEs digitally and acquire them now. We're able to convert intent with large order volumes and order values digitally now. I think this has been a huge disruption that we've been able to take advantage of as JSW1.
Thank you. Mandar, you would have seen this period of COVID through many different lenses. You've been a provider, Microsoft, NetMagic, now Jio. You would have seen it from many different lenses. What was your experience as you saw companies, grapple with this period?
Right. I think what we saw, the way people responded, right, is largely into the 4 buckets, how they handle this disruption. And I'll just tie that with the theme of this discussion. How are they future-proofing their own organization, right? The 4 lenses that we saw people operate, right? The first reaction was optimizing the operations. And there are multiple lenses to it, right? Optimization could be looked at, how do I cut my cost? How do I do faster turnaround times, right? How do I use technology for that? Pandemic added another layer is, how do I remote or digitally work? So that's one area that we saw definitely being focused a lot. The second area is empowering your employees, right? And I think that, which was typically, how do I do better collaboration in company and all that, suddenly changed. Because empowering your employees suddenly meant 2 more things. One, Kunal mentioned, right? Or even what Vishwanath mentioned, that my employees are now spread. How do they collaborate and effectively be productive? It's easier in certain functions, but it becomes very, very difficult in certain functions, right? You are developing an application. Now your developer team is spread across. They don't have those meetings where they actually agree on certain things. So that is an area where we saw a lot of innovation coming in, right? How do you empower your employees? The second aspect of that was, how do I empower my frontline workers, right? Because what we saw is the decision making was simpler, or if I get stuck, I will go to my manager and get a decision done and make the customer happy. That's no longer an option. So the empowerment of that frontline worker became very, very powerful. And that has multiple dimensions to it, right? Empowerment means there has to be a required audit trail, authentication, so on and so forth. So I think that layer we saw a big amount of innovation. The 2 other areas that we saw a lot of work happen, right? And that I think Mr. Lakshminarayanan actually spoke a lot about that, is on the product disruption. How do I look at competition which is not coming from my peers, but how do that competition is coming from a complete different source, right? He talked about banks and being disrupted by whether it is UPI or other fintechs, right? Now that is something that is becoming a very, very big focus for a lot of these guys. So most of the engagement that we are doing with my customers is actually helping them do that. But the key aspect that we are doing internally, now that I'm part of the Jio platforms, is how do I disrupt my own business, right? And I think that's a very interesting thing that I saw. I was with Microsoft for a long time. I saw mostly we trying to tell this to customers, right? How do you disrupt your business? How do you look at threat from a different perspective? But what I see here happening is we are actually trying to disrupt our own business. And that's a continuous process. You do that using technology, you do that using different business models. So it could be technology, it could be business model. But I think that got accelerated during COVID a lot, because everybody realizes that the way we used to do work earlier will no longer be acceptable, whether it is employees, whether it is customers, or even the business models are going to get disrupted. So I think that's a very powerful phenomenon that we are seeing being unleashed now.
Thanks, Mandar. Thank you. Mr. Pratik, you actually represent an organization I admire a lot. And Mark Benioff probably has his own share of admirers all over the place, right? You represent a very, very different organization. And through, you're an ecosystem in yourself. Your company is an ecosystem in itself, at the brink of many changes. So how did you see your customers, and how did you enable your customers in this period?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say thanks for the, what ServiceNow gets to the table. I think it's a huge cloud-based platform. If for those of you who are not aware of it, what we do, founded in 2004, etc. But what we did for the customer is primarily on 2 to 3 major points. One was helping them with the employee experience. Okay. And that has become very, very critical because as Vishy was mentioning earlier, a scramble for laptops, etc. How do you get that? What we helped our customers with, having a seamless, people are still joining companies. They're still, offboarding companies as well. How do you make that entire journey digital, right? So that entire employee onboarding, offboarding, that's a go-to-market, that's a solution set that we had that we were able to roll out to our customer. And post-COVID, during COVID itself, we saw a lot of adoption for that. Earlier it was in India that, okay, we'll think about it, digital onboarding, etc. But when all of this happened, people were struggling to do that. That's really when we felt that need. So that was one aspect. The other was we rolled out a lot of innovation around the supply chain, especially around vaccines. So we helped this with NHS in Scotland, helping roll out the entire vaccine administration management platform for Scotland over there. That was one example that we had. And finally, from a end employee perspective, there was a lot of focus on mental well-being because that has been a big challenge across. And I think you mentioned it earlier as well that there is a, if I can call it a war for attrition as well, or war for talent rather. So having all of these mechanisms in place does help you become an employer of choice at the end of the day, ensuring that it's a brand that people want to associate with. So those were a few of the things that we did. From a mental well-being perspective, I think we set certain specific Fridays off, compulsory, no meetings at all on those specific days, etc. So those were multiple ways that our organization did it. And at the end of the day, we are a product company, so focusing more on the innovation from a product perspective. That's really what we did. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Mr. Vishal, sorry, I did a mix-up of names. Given your vantage point, given where you've been with your own organization, what have you seen and how did you see companies cope? And you represent a very good, rich organization yourself. So.
Okay, so I look at this. So I look at this from two perspectives. So one is from a global commercial banking standpoint. I think that's the one which I'm most familiar with. And second, from an employee perspective. So the challenge that global banks typically have faced, like Barclays or HSBC or even Development Bank of Singapore and so on and so forth, has been primarily in terms of how do you reconcile the varying degrees of constraints that all the governments have put. Asia typically has seen the most amount of constraints, be it China, be it India. Some of the most strictest lockdowns has been seen in Asia per se. But then there have been varying degrees of regulations, constraints put by the other geographies. And how do you reconcile that so you can still work as BAU? That was a major aspect. How do you make a sense of all the dynamic scenarios? The second was, banking by definition is a very relationship-based business. More so for corporate banks, because they typically have a lot more human focus. They have a lot more dynamic needs, working capital needs, and so on and so forth. And once you have a scenario where you can't have the employees talking to the customers, that information flow stops. So how do you get a sense in terms of what is the inventory, what is the needs, and especially during a downturn. So do I need to stop the particular credit flow for a customer, given the fact that the person is in trouble? How do I get the information about the current financial situation, the balance sheet of the particular customer, if there is no contact being allowed? So that connection was lost, and that proved to be a major challenge. So we had to devise means by which we can still ensure the information flow happens, so credit decisions are being taken actively and properly and wisely, and still able to progress as a business. The challenge was not in terms of the lack of technology. Technology is always there. Digitization was nothing new. COVID only amplified that per se. But the challenge was that the digital aspects was not evenly spread. Asia was fairly high in terms of digital aspects, but many countries in Middle East and potentially in Europe were probably not there. They were still used to that human connect. So how do you get that customer adoption coming into picture so that they become more digital? That was one major focus. It's more in terms of the technology being there, but making the customer adopt it. And that's where the human aspects comes into picture. The second, from an employee standpoint, I mean, yes, there was logistical challenges in terms of laptops, sheer number of laptops not being there, network stability, because you never had so many people dialing in remotely at the same time. We always assumed 30% hybrid working ways of working. Suddenly, 100% employees all remotely working, so there was always a challenge there. But the biggest challenge was, I think, mentioned earlier about the great resignation that we see right now, which happened a bit later in the COVID crisis. For employees who are there typically for 5 years, 6 years in an organization, and suddenly they go remote, it's relatively easier for them to adjust because they have the connections, they have the trust, they have the stakeholder connects, they can work BAU. But then somebody who's coming new to the organization, without any connect whatsoever, they don't know the organization, know the people at all, they just come in and suddenly they're working from a laptop from house. How do you engage with those employees? How do you ensure that they don't feel part, they feel part of the team, and they don't have a reason to become mentally, for example, ill or disturbed and so on and so forth. That was a dual challenge that we faced. And I must say, at least the second part, we're still grappling with it. I don't think the technologies and the industry is ready in terms of how do you engage remote employees effectively so that they become part of the team, especially new employees. So these were the two primary challenges, customers and the connect with them, and second was more from an employee standpoint.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vishal. Mr. Ramesh, you would have seen some real tough times in those period because you were the CIO of HDFC at that point in time, for sure. And so what were some of your experiences? How did you ensure the bank kept running smoothly?
So I think, again, two parts to this. One is the transformation that is customer focused, because suddenly there is no branch network. You have 6,000 branches, and suddenly those branches are not working, right? I mean, that's the scale at which you are operating. So what do you do? So I think the whole digitization journey, see, digitization was there, like Vishal mentioned much earlier, but I think it was a very broken experience in the banking industry. You will have drop in the floor. You will say, okay, I will call him, then get some documents, send somebody out. This is how, so it was like partial digitization. So I think the entire customer focus changed overnight in terms of saying, I can't have the customer visiting the branches, but I need to service him completely digital. I think that was a very, very big shift. And the kind of technology that was kind of supporting it had to go through a lot of changes in that sense. Like I said, a lot of focus on experience journeys. Just to give you a little perspective here, in KYC, for example, was not digital. We never had a video KYC. Suddenly, in the pandemic, in the middle of the pandemic, video KYC was forced to, and regulator was also not ready. But there's no choice, you have to do it. You can't stop opening accounts. Now, how do you find a video KYC technology where, in the sense that you are able to connect the customer, you are able to verify him, and you're able to do it inline in the same journey? There are a lot of challenges. One, of course, just the fact that the video interviews, the clarity, then the entire the authentication mechanism had to be changed. And then also it has to be embedded into your entire digital journey flow. So right from plumbing the journeys to introducing new technology to new platforms, then security, which is a huge aspect in the banking industry. Right? How do you make these digitally journeys secure? So a lot of those changes. In fact, I think that's where we had maximum problems. And I think that's one thing that's come out of this is that the nature of the construct, I would say, or the mindset, the cultural mindset has been a big shift for our employees. Suddenly, our internal employees don't today think cloud is not here, or they don't think that AI/ML won't work. This was a problem a couple of years back. I think the cultural mind shift to me has been the biggest gain of, while it's been the pain from a implementation perspective, but it's a gain from a future perspective. Internally, like you said, like everybody else said, it's like, okay, amplified. I mean, how do you get 160,000 people laptops, overnight? And I'll be shocked, but just to give you a perspective, we were working on Lotus Notes, which was a completely online, on-prem email model. And in 5 months, we had to get everybody onto Note 365 at a scale of 160,000 people going on that. But I think those were still small hurdles. But where is it going from here is interesting. And just to give a little bit more perspective. So today, O365, for example, we use a lot of our Teams today, which is a collaborative tool. And just take a simple example. If you keep it an internal collaboration tool, it's great, but it's like a WhatsApp. What do you get beyond that? So now what we are seeing is, we are actually seeing dynamic shifting. For example, relationship managers today, there is a full program where we are trying to push analytics onto the teams, saying which customer you will call, which are the top 5 customers you will call, which are the top 5, probabilistic conversion is high for these 5 customers, which are the top 5 service issues. And these are now being fed into these collaborative tools through a back-ended engine. This kind of a change, from this is what we call as a headless CRM structure now. These are very seminal shifts in the industry, even for the employees to kind of use the collaboration tools. So I think what is also happening, so while customers learn digital, internal employees also have to squeeze out the digital as they go along. So it's a very interesting play out that's happening. I think next 2-3 years we will see how this goes. So.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think we'll now move to our next set of questions. I think we had very good experiences from the experience all of us have had in this period. Given that we now have some kind of a perspective, we've gone through one cycle of this. And we like to think that, yes, we now have a perspective on what is necessary to future-proof organizations. I'm very curious to understand if you had to decide, hey, you need to do these 5 things to future-proof organizations. What would those 5 things be? 5, 7. I mean, I'm not. So we'll start with you, Mr. Vishwanathan. If companies have to future-proof themselves, they need to take care of some of these aspects.
So I'm smiling because it's a very intriguing and an interesting question at the same time. Honestly, when the pandemic hit us, we didn't know what to do, right? And it's not just us. I mean, all organizations in the world didn't know what to do. Some of them took 3 months, some of them took 6 months, some of them have yet not recovered, right? Now, specifically for us, the way we looked at this entire thing is, what can we do digitally? So we are a tech organization. We do product development. We have partnerships. So after the initial 3-6 months of, so-called mourning of the COVID period, we decided to, pull up our socks and start 2 or 3 things. So one, we realized, during this entire period, there was so much news and probably more realistic around cyber crimes, right? So we have a cyber division, incidentally, in our organization. And we said we were focusing on a certain set of things before COVID. But as the COVID hit us, we went into real life cyber related issues. So, we heard about path thefts. We heard about, people getting robbed using cyber. There was so much information that was, true or false getting, out on the social media. So we kind of developed in-house products, and pretty quickly, fortunately, where we decided to, provide these solutions to not just private organizations, but even to the governments, right? Because governments needed social media the most at that point in time, and they wanted to validate information. That was one thing that we did very, proactively, I think, because we are seeing the benefits of it right now. But also, besides moving just to government and social media, we also worked a lot on, the threat intelligence part of it. So we are actually working on threat intelligence for various government, semi-government, quasi-government, private organizations, where we are making sure that, their entire data, their entire security is so foolproof that, any cyber-related crimes can be taken care of. And I should say hackers took the most of this period of really getting into your system and messing it up, right? So that was one thing that we did. The second thing that a lot has been spoken about it right today also is around blockchain. We realized that a lot of institutions like SPJIMR, for example, were conducting classes, but didn't have a real mechanism to issue certificates. So we have actually developed a product which is on digital certificates. So it works on the blockchain technology, it's tamper proof, and so I'm not trying to sell the product here, but but essentially it's more about bringing those kind of technologies to the fore. So we adapted ourselves to the more positive aspect of it, and we think that there is now a lot of benefit that we are seeing for our own organizations, having taken some step ahead of many others. So that's how I think we managed to get off the hump. But I honestly don't think that we are still there, but I think we are on the right track.
Thank you. Thank you. To you, Kunal, your platform represents the future, and it's probably the way the participants in your platform would future-proof themselves. So what are some of your points from future-proofing perspective?
Sure. I think, enough has been said and will be said about COVID, so I don't want to focus on that area. Also, we didn't exist as an organization when COVID hit. We kind of grew out of it. I don't think disruption is done, right? And disruption won't happen, challenges won't come just because of COVID, right? There are other things happening in this world that will create challenges. For us, this happened over the last few months, right? The war in Ukraine, the challenges globally that it created, the supply chain disruptions created immense change in both prices and availability of commodities. Suddenly there was, gaps in supply. You couldn't get access, especially MSMEs could not get access to raw materials they needed on a daily basis to keep their factories moving. Construction contractors could not keep sites alive. We realized that even as a young organization, we'll complete a year in operations at the end of this month. We realized that we needed to innovate, be more agile as well. The first area we realized we needed to improve on is better visibility. How do we use technology? How do we use digital connectivity to bring better visibility? The first space we looked at is our supply chain itself. If you don't have real-time visibility into our supply chain, we will not be able to serve our customers any better than the competition, or even the competition that comes locally, right? That's where we can make a change. We can connect that ecosystem digitally and serve the customer better. They'll help us build trust, and we'll take what was a disruption into a factor that can accelerate our business. One area where we realized we were doing a very poor job, or at least hadn't started efforts on, is predictability. Again, disruption is going to be hard to predict, right? Global challenges will come, local challenges will come. How do you break down these challenges into factors that will impact your business, right, your organization? We started doing that. It's a very recent effort. But the idea is that let's understand how factors will be impacted, how those factors will impact supply and demand equation for our universe, and how do you codify it so that as these factors change, or as we understand how these factors are changing, we can get better predictability as to how business is going to change, and we can adapt better to it. The third is really not related to technology, but it's really bringing a culture of agility in the organization. The last couple of years, 3 years have really shown us that you cannot get complacent, right? Next month there may be a challenge from somewhere else. You have to build a culture where everybody from leadership to the team that's on the field meeting your customers needs to understand that they cannot get complacent. They have to be agile, right? You may change the organization based on circumstances, may need to change its target customer, it may need to change its area of business, it may need to rapidly onboard new employees in a certain area. It may need to lay off employees in a certain area. I think it's important to accept that this will happen and build that culture within the organization so that you can deal with that next challenge in a much better way. And as a culture, we've started doing that. I mean, we're already a young culture, so, you know, team members joining us had already been through that change, so it's a little bit easier for us, but we've doubled down on those efforts. You know, we transparently communicate when there are challenges in the company. We have town halls every few weeks. We take preemptive action. Tech itself is going potentially through a downturn globally. We've already preemptively started cutting down on costs, right, even though we're in growth phase, so that we can, you know, we don't have to cut down on costs when things become difficult next year or the year after that, right? So we can actually gracefully fall into any, you know, gracefully adapt to any challenge that comes across.
Thanks.
That's it.
To you, Mandar, you know, Mr. Ramesh talked about the India stack, the Bharat stack, right? And I often feel afraid that should we suddenly become a subject of sanctions, should India become a subject of sanctions, the only thing that will hold it is going to be the India stack, maybe the India data centers, the Indian cloud, you know. Should one fine morning Azure and AWS choose to, you know, I mean, not that they want to walk away, but the sanctions come away. So what is your, I mean, you have a very good perspective. What is your perspective from future-proofing organizations? You are one of the key infrastructure providers that way, so.
Yeah, a very interesting question, because until about a year back, I spent almost half of my time in convincing regulators. That's not going to happen, right? You should use MNCs, you should use Azure and AWS and Google, because we are there. And now I'm on the other side of the table and I'm telling them, you should build an India stack, you should trust an Indian player. So it's an interesting shift. But I think I'll kind of build on what even Mr. Ramesh said, right? The UPI, the way it actually enabled India. And we are seeing that even in the telecom data center cloud world. About 5 years back, there were a handful of players who were building their data centers, who were building their cloud technology. I'll kind of break this question into two, data center and cloud separately. Because data center, while we were a small player in the data center market, there were Indian players, right? I used to represent, I worked with Tatacom, NetMagic, so there were good Indian players there. But we were a very small footprint player, right? Most of them were a smaller data center footprint. So over last 5 years, or rather last 3 years, that has dramatically changed. And it changed because a lot of cloud service providers started coming to India. So the shift that happened is from what we call as retail data center to wholesale. The data center players were really selling to an enterprise customer, right? Some of the larger ones like HDFC probably are a large customer, but most of the customers of these guys were smaller. So that suddenly changed because of the cloud. So they are targeting very large customers, so the footprint gone up. Because the Indian players are building large, a lot of international investment has come up. So what we see now is a very booming data center economy in India. Indian players are investing large, and you have people like Reliance, people like Adani Group has made investment, Controllers. A lot of these guys are making huge investments. Also global players are building very large data center parks. But the second thing that started is very interesting, in fact, in my opinion, is the cloudification from data center, right? So the data center's target used to be the end customers. That shifted because they are saying, I have better ROI if I target a cloud company. If I get a ServiceNow will go and get me 1,000 customers. So the data centers are now targeting cloud players as the primary customer and large enterprises as the other one. The wholesale or the retail market or the mid-market, essentially they're saying cloud guys will bring it to me. So that's a very interesting shift that has happened. There is a technology shift that has happened. Every data center or a telecom provider at some point of time in their career, in their life, had an ambition of becoming building a technology stack. So everybody invested in building their own cloud platform. But what has happened over last maybe 5 years is cloud is now a complete software game. The earlier idea of cloud that I can buy infrastructure cheap and build my own cloud stack using whether it is VMware, Citrix, Red Hat or open source, right, is no longer true. Because when we talk of cloud, we no longer talk of cloud as a VM storage. So the infrastructure has got really commoditized. Everybody does it well, including enterprises can do it well themselves. So the cloud as we know now is largely the analytics, the AI/ML, the blockchain, or a lot of platform services, whether it is database platform, developer platform, so on and so forth. Now that you can only build if you have a large software developer team. So cloud from infrastructure has completely moved to a software player. There you see a lot of software companies, largely a lot of international software companies and some of those Indian software companies who have good control on a developer actually becoming dominant. So if you had asked me this question about 5 years back, right, who are the top cloud players, I would have typically taken names of telco and data center guys. Today that has shifted a lot. I would not name top cloud guys as the data center infrastructure guys, but largely the software guys. And in my opinion, this picture will even become interesting in about 3 years. Cloud will more or less become SaaS, in my opinion. We will consume infrastructure, we will still use platform, but most of the things that people will consume from cloud will be either as complete SaaS or as Mr. Ramesh mentioned, through APIs. A lot of that application consumption will happen through APIs, even if it is platform. So the two trends that I clearly see, enterprises adopting big time SaaS as a cloud, or they will consume using APIs what I need from the platform. But this pure lift, shift, or the cloud as we knew, maybe 3 years.
Thank you. So you're saying SaaSification and pacification, that is all the cloud is about now.
Absolutely. And API, I think one of the areas that you see a lot of interesting work happening is in API. Whether it is cloud or there is a middle layer broker, especially in fintech, right? We are seeing a middle layer emerging. So rather than a bank integrating with 20 fintechs, right? A middle service provider like a brokerage who have an API already integrated with them. Now that's a layer I see in 2 areas. One is banking or fintechs I see. The other little bit that I'm seeing in healthcare. But I think that will become a very interesting area.
Sure. Good. Thank you. So we will be in good hands, even if we get sanctions on us, right? I think. Okay. So now to you, Pratik, and I'm being told that we are going very slow, so probably we'll make it the last question round. I'll probably raise one challenge question to a couple of, maybe to Ramesh. So to you, Pratik, how should organizations future-proof themselves, given, such big players such as ServiceNow, your stack?
So, the way I see, and I'll probably tell from my experience and how our customers are going to market, how they are changing. And there are a couple of things. One is that it started with IT leading that, being the vanguard of transformation, right? That has happened. And IT is probably because tech, they know how things work, they take it forward. Now, the second, what I'm seeing transformation is happening, that the CEOs are saying, why can't finance also transform? Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of transformation from the finance segment happening. Because they say, IT is moving very fast, but what if finance is still working on spreadsheets, for example? Okay, they are still working on mails. How can we get them onto a common layer, for that matter? So that has become very accented, if I can call it, the last couple of years, or the last 1 year specifically, that I'm seeing a lot of, from a lot of our customers asking for digital finance transformation. How are you going to do it? All that I need to do is suppose a ledger entry into the ERP. Yet I don't want people to log into a system and then do it. How can I activate a big transformational platform to do it? So that is one thing that I'm seeing very commonly, and that's probably a good thing that the CEOs have decided that it's, one thing is IT, let's go in and start transforming the employee experience and now the finance experience also, for that matter, for accountants, everyone all across. The other is kind of reimagining what we are doing today from a regular process. And I'll give you an example. Like, we did this for a very large airline. All of you all know about it. So they had this use case. They said, we want to go on that digitization journey. Can you help us? And we said, okay, sure. Let us know, how do you want us to do? So we did a workshop, and they gave us what is known as a BRD, if you all are aware that it's a business requirement doc. And they said, we are struggling to figure out how do we get this process, digitized. And the process is very simple. When this aircraft lands, it starts taxiing, right? And then it stops. And you'll notice there are a couple of people on both sides who are doing this thumbs up, right? Beyond doing that thumbs up, the next thing that they go is, start fixing things, securing the aircraft, opening the cargo hold. And then this person starts taking photograph of how much space is there in the cargo hold, okay, with his phone. And then he makes some changes on his, a piece of paper, and then they WhatsApp it to their control center. So they said, this is something, this is a process. We've been doing it for the 10 years. So what we did is we very, very quickly spun up an app, a low-code app for that matter, and reimagined this in an entirely different way. We said, you have an out-of-box mobile app. All that you have to do is take photographs, same thing. It's just that the reconciliation, normalization is going to happen at the cloud level. You don't have to really think about it. And for that paper pen, we said, oh, there's just a quick form. And not even a form where you're going to make multiple changes, because when you start filling up the form, it's already saying that, hey, is this a Boeing? Is this an A321 kind of thing? So we reimagined that process. And they said, this was a process which was manual for the last 10 years. If we were to get developers to do this, 7, 8 good developers, maybe 3, 4 months. So I said, okay, we saved, you can do the maths over there and how we did. So I think reimagining these experiences is becoming very important. So it's not just the digitization part. I agree, Lakshminarayanan sir was saying, that is also a challenge that we see in the Bharat side of things. How can we get that digitization? But it's also the reimagining of a lot of experiences that we are talking about. So I think those are the two main, how I am seeing the industry, how our customers evolve at the end of the day. Yeah.
My second last question to you, Mr. Vishal, and then I'll pose one last question to Mr. Ramesh, and we'll wind up. Given your perspective, what do you think your company or companies similar to your company should future-proof? What should they do?
So, if it is okay, I'll probably answer the question a bit differently, and this might be going into your earlier address about this being more HR topic. But I'll give you the reason why I'm saying this as well. So, if you look at, I've been a change and transformation person for my entire career, so I've looked at how change has happened, right? And technology has been driving the change faster and faster and faster. There's a very interesting graph which I'd seen earlier. I think I was there for a couple of days earlier in a guest lecture, and I showed the same graph to a few students. How technology has really changed us. For example, airlines took about 68 years to touch 50 million users. Telephones took about 50 plus years to touch 50 million users. Internet took about 7 years. Pokemon Go took 19 days. So there's a massive change happening, and I think Zoom also is a classic example. It touched 100 million users, added 100 million users in just 1 month's time. So I see a scenario where technology is going to become faster and faster and faster. And the only thing that will stop organizations from changing is that ability to accept that change. Because the faster and faster technology changes, you really can't future-proof yourself unless you're in a position to actually accept that change and move along with it. That will become our major driver. Technology is not a driver. So it's not a major limiting factor. The limiting factor is going to be our ability to accept that particular change. So to future-proof, I think the biggest thing is change the mindset. So mindset in 2 ways. One is from the point of view of how IT is viewed in the organizations. Historically, IT has always been, to be honest, I think it's been more second level. So I have hardly seen IT or technology or CTOs being included in, say, strategy offsites. You have the business, you have the CEOs, and they actually get into an offsite and they talk about stuff and then come back and say, transformation, IT, this is what we want to do. The mindset shift that has to happen right now is IT is center stage. Any organization, no matter where you look at banks or look at FMCG companies or wherever you are, IT becomes the center stage. So they have to become, the mindset change has to happen at the leadership level to focus upon making IT the change, because they are the drivers of the future. The technology is a major driver for change today. That's one mindset shift. You can't have a strategy without IT. That's a fact of the life. The second would be in terms of, and I think you touched upon that as well, in terms of the ability to accept that change, right? So the change saturation is what we call in the marketplace. That is a real aspect. There was a very interesting survey done where all the CIOs and the CEOs were asked the question, where do you believe your organization is from a change saturation perspective? 55% came back and said that we are past the change saturation point. You try to deliver a change, IT change, new system, new development, and it won't be accepted because people are saying enough is enough. So how do you bring about the mindset change within the employees and make them understand that this is an important part of them? So get them to accept the change is equally important. So future proofing is mainly around mindset change.
Thank you so much, Vishal. Thank you so much for making such very pertinent observations and points. Thank you so much. Last question to you, Mr. Ramesh. You probably face future-proofing challenges every single day of your work life. What are the challenges that you see before any such change agent? You're a change agent. You're making so many changes where you are. What are the big challenges you see? And what do you think are the ways those challenges have to be tackled? And with that, we'll end the panel discussion.
So I think, Vishal alluded, I think a lot of the change is not in the technology side. I mean, frankly, it's the software aspects that actually hold you back. It's never about technology. And especially, I always think that, and I've done this in my earlier avatar as somebody who started a startup. It's easy to start from scratch. Zero-based organization is easy. Okay, you get fresh talent. Mindset is positive. It's very, very close-knit family. Camaraderie is there. So common goal, you push and it gets done. When you come to large enterprise organizations, I think the main problem is obviously the fact that you're sitting with the kind of a mindset that's got into you for a long time, right? And it's not easy. 25 years in my organization, in this case, the company has done it in one way, right? And suddenly you kind of come and say, oh no, this is not the way, and probably you're not the best. That acceptance is, to me, the biggest challenge actually at every level. I'm just talking, it starts from the ground level actually, because it's percolated down over years that you're the best, you're the best, you're the best. And suddenly you found that you've been in a well, and the world outside has moved fast, and you're no longer the best, and you don't want to accept it. Okay, I think so. That's the first problem I see. The biggest thing is the mindset change. We took a time to kind of overcome, but if you see today, a lot of us kind of talk about it openly, that we had challenges, we're not there, we want to change. That's the first part. Second is the talent. I think talent is going to be the biggest. It's not trivial. I think we are sitting on a very big time bomb, if you ask me, because the rate at which the change is being imagined and that it's coming through, to support that you need talent at a very, very rich level, and that's not coming through today. While a lot of students out here, these are very good campuses, tier A colleges, with a lot of inputs and orientations that are coming through. But you go down the chain, I think, and that's where I kind of spoke about the Bharat effort, right? I think just like how we're getting digitization into Bharat, the training aspects have to go deeper into the hinterland. Your best programmers have to rather come from tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities. They don't need to shift to cities. They don't need to struggle through the ecosystem that they're currently struggling through. So I think that is a very, very cultural aspect. And I think the pandemic has taught there's a digital way. I mean, if edtechs can be billion-dollar unicorns, there is something about training and talent, right? I think we need to really think through and how to maintain the quality levels. I think that's the second part. The third part, like again Vishal brought out, is the cycle. The agility cycles have very clearly shortened today. We cannot, today it's like every 3 months is a new cycle actually. And unfortunately that puts a lot of stress on the mental health of professionals. That's the other aspect that I wanted to touch upon. We're living in a world where, while we talk about great attrition, unfortunately our country is still not there. I mean, we kind of, there is only certain set of people who can say, I will take sabbatical from tomorrow, I will go mountain hiking, It's not, because we have families to support, we have a very different ecosystem today, right? So I think mental health is again a very, very important aspect of how we kind of nurture our employees in the future. And I think those are foundational. So the cultural mindset, the talent pool and training along with that, and then the mental health aspects. I think those will be the drivers of the change, if you ask me, and the rest will follow, because that's how the humankind is. We will always be innovative, we will always push change. But because the rate and the scale at which it is coming, it's substantially different. That's the challenge. And those are all softer. none of the things that I spoke about is actually a empirical challenge. It's all software element challenges. So.
Thank you so much, Ramesh. Thank you so much for your, concluding thoughts. And actually, yes, those are the big aspects that really need to be tackled before any big change can be done. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, fellow panelists. Thank you so much for sharing so generously. Thank you.
Must say, there is a lot to learn from this panel discussion. We talked about cyber threats during pandemic, how the organizations are adapting to it, the importance of change saturation, and knowing too much of change is also not good, the right mindset that the organizations need to adopt, the human and the people-centric approach that they need to take. It's not only about revenues and profits, it's about people mainly. So yeah, moving forward.
We now open the session for questions from the audience. I request the audience to raise their hands and we shall bring the microphone to you. Please keep your questions brief. You may direct the question to the entire panel or a particular panelist. Professor Jha, I request you to moderate the Q&A.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the interesting discussion today, and thank you for being here. Am I audible? Yeah. My question to all the panelists is, what happens if a disruption comes that takes internet out of the picture? Like we have seen, let's say in my grandfather's generation, there were multiple redundancies. For example, there were post offices, there were banks, there were social places. People used to connect from there. There was internet, there was TV, radio, and multiple ways to connect with people. But now, as everything is moving to internet, what would happen if there's no internet tomorrow?
So, should I give the question to someone? One of our panelists?
Sure, ma'am, please.
I think it seems like a Mandar question, the infrastructure question.
Okay, so there are two scenarios, right? One is internet is just down, right? It's gone, or it is being replaced, right? The way the generational shift here you talked about, right? The radios are still there. Nobody uses them, right? The more likely scenario, in my opinion, is internet will get replaced by some other form of communication, right? Communication mediums, that's basic human need. So radio or meeting at some place, right? Meeting in a village gathering got replaced by internet. So in my opinion, the more likely scenario is internet. If at all it gets replaced, it will get with some other communication medium. So that's number one. So you want to add?
Please.
Yeah, so that is likely happen. It might be Meta, it might be anything else. Now, internet being down, right? There is a surge, something happens, somebody screws up a DNS or something, right? That can anyway happen, and we have seen pockets of that. But as per the infrastructure or the network goes, right? I think internet is fundamentally a democratized service. There are some root DNS, disruption of that could actually be large impact. But apart from that, it's very democratic. It's not a connection between two locations as such, right? So internet being completely down is slightly difficult to imagine. It's definitely not impossible. But the likely scenario is a part of that going down, right? As I said, root DNS is an example. But complete internet, because it is not developed by somebody. So there is not a company or a nation which actually developed internet. It has been organically grown. It's difficult. I'll actually extend on that what question madam asked me as well, right? Let's say there is an embargo or there is something that happens to India. And that thought actually came up, right? The .NET domains or all of those internet infrastructure that we have now put in India is because of that thought, right? And I think all countries, good and bad, are building that self-reliance, right? Good because they are making those countries self-reliant. If they, let's say our CME, all the internet cables are cut, can I be running internet within India and still be sustainable? So they are building to a certain extent that possible. Bad because those also raise boundaries, right? What that means is I will be dependent or I will be completely regulated by my country. If that happens to be a good regulation, that happens to be a good polity, right? Then it's good. It can also, we have seen negative things of that, right? That some countries use that regulation or firewalls to stifle any public voice as well. So long answer, but my quick summary is that likely internet is likely to get replaced, that's more probable scenario. It is going down is slightly difficult. In pockets, yes, whole internet down is a difficult to imagine scenario because there is no central entity which controls it.
So just one extension to the question. If you're talking about future-proofing the organizations, shouldn't we consider this aspect that internet would go completely down on a day and we'll have to deal with the offline world?
Not at an organization layer. At the maybe a national level, you need to think about not as internet going down, but what if you get disconnected, right? What we are seeing to a certain extent happening to Russia, right? The internet is not down, but practically all companies who you would go to internet for, right, are getting out of Russia, right? Google and WhatsApp and all that have stopped services. So you might still have internet in Russia, but the end users is down, right? So that nations are actually thinking about. See, before, like we talk about before and after pandemic, right? I think before and after Russia or Ukraine war is also a very interesting scenario because the kind of isolation that happened in Russia, is happening with Russia, is unparalleled, right? There have been countries like North Korea and Iran where have been various restrictions put. But I think to Russia, West, the swift disconnection that has been talked, all of that, right? Now, I have not heard to that extent an isolation of the country. And that has put a lot of nations to think about, what if I get isolated? Not only from financial or other transactions, but also from internet at some point of time, right? What if the WhatsApp, on which a lot of small businesses have built their business model, is no longer being served in country? And I think you will see some change. Already I work in the regulated field with the regulators. I'm seeing some thought process. So you will see a lot of nations actually take some protective step against that. I give an example, .in is now a domain that a lot of Indian companies are using. So if tomorrow .com is not accessible to India, .in can serve. You will see those steps happening, definitely, at national level. Organized level, I doubt whether you will be able to do too much.
Thank you, sir.
Very interesting question.
Maybe you can pass on the mic to Weber.
Am I audible? Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and experience. So my question was regarding the fact that as we were talking about the Bharat, that the way we are moving digital now, what is the weightage of the security aspect in the whole of this? The reason I'm asking it is because we have heard so much about Aadhaar leakages. People were raising questions about Arogya Setu as well. So what is the weightage given to the security aspect of it? The second question was, are there any major Indian players in this security domain, or is it still being outsourced to foreign companies?
Shall I give this quick? See, firstly, there are no Bharat stack, proponents here who can answer it, really. But still, I'm sure our panel will do something about it. So, Mr. Ramesh.
I'll take a stab at it because I work closely with the iSpirit Foundation, which is kind of an India stack. I don't know how many of you have heard about iSpirit here. Yeah, you should just go and look up. It's a voluntary organization that largely Nandan propagated, and then it's led by Sharat Saxena today. Very, very, very forward-thinking organization. They do a lot of work in the area of what I spoke about, the digital stack for Bharat. So I think two parts to this question here, like he said, in terms of security. I think security is at the center of the discussion at the end of the day. I mean, it is, whether it's Aadhaar, whether it is Arogya Setu, but you must also understand that security is a very, it's something that you can play on either sides. You can secure as much as you want, but one small compromise or one perceived compromise can also create issues, right? But structurally, just to give you a little background, a lot of open source platforms are being used in building this stack actually. So if you see most of the Aadhaar stack, you probably would not know, but 100% of the Aadhaar stack is an open source. Is it good? Yes, it's good from a fact that it's open source, easily available, source codes are there, but it also brings vulnerabilities, right? So I think from that perspective, it is a constant question. What is happening there? And just to give a little bit more perspective is, the structure of security build. See, I believe a lot of security is the build level. You can keep putting whatever, parameters, perimeters you want to. Fundamentally, the point of compromise is at the build level. If your security is poor, software design is poor, everything is poor. Okay, that's where it starts, right? I think a lot of new concepts have come in today. For example, DevSecOps is a reality today, right? A lot of stuff happens much upfront in the software development cycle, and you will find a lot of these solutions today in line, right? I mean, we understand today in terms of whether it's SAST or DAST or some of these app scans happening much upfront in the chain. So I think the quality of the software is getting better, and that's where open source is also helping. By the way, a lot of open source tools themselves are coming to kind of give you better security. So I think in that sense, it is definitely a center of discussion. Aadhaar security, and to my mind, I work very closely with Shrikant Nadamuni, who happens to be on the CTO of Aadhaar. There are a lot of thoughts that have gone in. So, while there is a lot of play around saying is it secure or not secure, the construction is secure. But there will be points of compromise that you will keep coming up because each use case scenario is very different. So as we go along, I think security is key. But as I said, I can't see a single answer. You can only give as much of effort to build the security into these products. But there will be, and frankly, there will be attacks. Let's also be realistic. There is geopolitical pressure, whether it's UPI, whether it's Aadhaar, whether it is the digital locker, they will be under threat. I think government is doing a lot. They've, in fact, have set up a center, a new umbrella called NCIIPC, which basically looks at national assets, how to secure, what kind of threat intelligence you are getting. So there's a lot of work happening in the background that, and I'm just saying I'm not fully privy, I'm only telling you what I get at the edge because of one of the players in the system. But yes, there is a lot of focus to answer that question, and it will be a continuous focus. Indian security company, look, I don't know, maybe Mandar, you want to take it from a previous Microsoft perspective? I can speak about, but maybe you're the right person,
Thanks. Yeah, so there are a lot of Indian companies who are operating in security domain, right? And security also is a very wide variety. You're talking of security from appliance, from security from software tools, and actually security services. Services, we have always been there. But increasingly, you see a lot of software companies actually building the security stack. Appliance, we are still little nascent, India perspective. But on services and on security applications, right? For doing either building better security applications, or actually using tools for doing better security. We are pretty good. You see a lot of Indian companies. And they are in both. Very large Indian companies have smaller, but there are very good niche players who are doing that work. So I'm fairly confident that there are Indian companies. We work with a lot of them as well. In Microsoft as well, I work with a lot of Indian companies. In fact, while Microsoft has a stack on security, when it came to implementation or when it came to customization, the small niche Indian companies actually did a fantastic job. I think at the appliance level, because generally we were not a very hardware or manufacturing heavy, you don't see too many Indian players there, but you see some very good companies coming there. Telecom, we have been very successful in indigenizing the hardware stack. And on network also, or on security also, there are companies, but that's an area where we can still do better.
Thank you.
Can I go ahead?
Yes,
sir. We had discussion about the sanctions, and we have seen the Russian part. We also talked about ONDC, and there was a news item that ONDC may be working with WhatsApp. One of the news items coming in live mint. And how do you react to that? Because both of these things don't go together now.
So I'll kind of come in here. See what is happening. There is also so while we are kind of talk about sovereign protection and sovereign risk, what I'm also seeing, and this is practical thing, I'm seeing a lot of corridor cooperation that's happening today. What I mean by that is that, and I spent some time in Valley last month actually, and kind of studying what they're doing from a technology perspective. What is happening is very interesting actually. Earlier, you will have the large US tech companies trying to do work in US, and that's the first market they used to look at. So most of the products that evolved in the few years back would be largely developed for the US market, thought from that market perspective. What I'm seeing is a very subtle shift now where the use cases can be global. And fortunately, and we are in a very sweet spot as a country, that a lot of them are scale problems actually. And a lot of these solutions, so WhatsApp today has no other option but to work with an Indian player, because that's their fundamental model. Whether it is coming on UPI, whether it is looking at WhatsApp for business, whether it's using marketplace applications. In fact, and I spent time with the Meta guys also, because WhatsApp is, Meta never had a business division all this while. Because they never thought from that there will be a stage where they will have to actually go to enterprises. Okay. But they're realizing that it's a very different world that's playing out. And I do see that there is a lot of collaboration that's happening, and at the same time there's contradiction. So it's a little bit of, I think what is happening is the localization laws will apply, and companies that are interested to do business at scale, they will have to follow those norms. I think fundamentally, and they are open, because what they are also, like as I said, they're seeing an opportunity at scale. So you see today, whether it's Azure has Mandar, it's the only, in India they have 4 clouds actually, okay, outside of US. No other country they have. Same with Google, same with, with AWS, they're all kind of, because they're figuring that this market, and China is kind of closed, that, Anil, it's kind of closed in that sense. So I think between India and China, it will be a good play out for the technology players. And I see a lot of these collaboration and contradictory collaborations coming through. So it's an interesting play out, yeah, but that's how it will pan out.
Harshit.
Can this be the last question? Is this the last question?
Yes.
Hello, sir. So I'm Harsha Shukla. I'm from Information Management specialization. So my question is more around the career guidance perspective. So obviously tech companies do have their sophisticated software development teams. So as management students, what are your expectations, and what skill set do we need to have mainly from the job perspective? And because in yesterday we were told about that we also need to learn some technologies. So if we talk about technologies, which technologies in particular, and what all is expected of us, because there's all obviously development team and the other teams in the organization. Thank you.
So maybe I can take a first shot, right? And that's primarily because I moved the role. I lead the product development or product portfolio at Jio for cloud. And initially, because I came from very strong technology background, Microsoft, my first focus was hiring technology guys, right? And then the HR team said that we are going to give you a lot of product managers, exactly your type of people, right? 5 years experience, and then they have done management courses, and they started coming to me. For a minute, I was wondering, what do I do? Where do I place them, right? And then a lot of things actually, because of that, came through. So there are 2 distinct areas where I see this happening, right? One is, especially in software companies or cloud or the technology companies, product management is becoming stronger and stronger. And that is both vertical and horizontal. So you'll have product management for platforms or solutions, and you'll have product management by industry. So I see a huge industrialization happening across all industries, all tech companies. They are going vertical and they are going micro verticals, right? If you ask anyone verticals, right, typically they will say BFSI and manufacturing and healthcare and all that. That's no longer true, right? At Jio, we have 110 verticals. Obviously, there are priority verticals and all of that. But you see that happening a lot. So one, product manager's roles on the platform. So you could be good on a technology and become a platform or a technology product manager, or other is the industry or vertical one. So that's number one part, answer to your first question. The second, which technology, I think all of us spoke about being change ready, right? So if I tell you, you should be focusing on AI, that may not be 2, 3 years or 5 years down the road. So what I would recommend is you should have a strong technology foundation, but be ready to adopt. Right? And that's the only thing, right? None of us will have a silver bullet. And I not only used to be, I still come at SPJIMR on various topics I talk, right? But I also do that for engineering students at various things. And I used to tell earlier students that if you want to remain on technology, right, there are 3 things that you should really go well. If you want to survive, you should, I mean, there are 3 things which are like gospel. Unix, TCP/IP, and the third thing is a programming language. It could be C, Java, whatever. If you want to survive, you should know one very, very good in technology industries. If you want to do well, you should know 2, Unix and TCP/IP, whatever it is. And if you want to really do well, you should know all 3. I will add data to it now, right? The 4th thing that is becoming very important is data. But that's more for a guy who wants to be in technology. But if you want to be in management, pick up any one of them, be strong at that, and then keep on adopting.
Thank you.
A small different perspective to this question. So a lot of organizations that we are also seeing right now are looking at 2 kinds of people. One is the real experts, like what Mandar said. But a lot of organizations are also looking at functional guys. So, the combination of both functional and development guys is what's going to make the team. Also, the other change that we are also seeing is, if you don't ask me the salary of people, but there are certain areas and certain products that are now getting up there, and it's rising continuously. What used to be, for example, a 6 lakh kind of a compensation is now like a 40 lakh compensation. So there is a dramatic change. So if you try to start focusing on functional aspects and also in the same parallel get used to some kind of a technology, I think that's what's going to make the difference going forward.
Thank you.
So just want to echo, so I had 2 things. One is slightly different perspective, and just want to echo what he also said, because what I'm seeing right now is that business, when I say business, I mean the business stakeholders, they always have a view of the market. But now they have started speaking a lot more of IT language. So in the last call that I actually had the senior vice president actually talking about APIs and stacks and everything else, and I was very surprised by that. But that's increasingly happening more and more. And just to echo the point being made, we also expect from an IT perspective to have the view of the business outcomes. Because ultimately, unless you have the visibility of the problem you're trying to solve, you may not be able to make a difference. That's one. So we need to have that cross knowledge, and especially from an MBA standpoint, the business outcome focus is the most critical. Second is, in terms of the other question that you asked, in terms of what do I need to learn, which technology. Going back to what I mentioned earlier, the pace of technology is so fast, you can't predict. You can only prepare yourself. There was one survey done where they said 85% of the jobs that will exist in 2030 have not been invented yet. So you can't even predict. So today you have blockchain, you have AI, you have ML, but then tomorrow you'll have something fundamentally different. The only thing that you can do is to learn how to learn. That's one thing you can take away as a key item. It's 100% sure that whatever you learn today, you'll have to unlearn that, relearn something else. So as long as you don't have a magic wand that if you know blockchain or if you know AI, ML for the next 20 years, you're set. Absolutely not. Things will keep on changing, and therefore you have to be prepared to unlearn and relearn every time. That's one skill you have to learn, learning how to learn.
Thank you.
Great. So those were some really interesting questions that we asked, and I'm sure we got really comprehensive answers for those. Finally, coming to the end of this conclave, thank you audience for the enthusiastic participation. On behalf of the SPJIMR family, we extend our heartfelt thanks to all the panelists for taking time to visit our campus and interacting with the students. The panel discussion has helped put into perspective the exciting and upcoming technologies that are disrupting industries at a faster pace than ever. We look forward to your visit again, and we also hope you enjoyed interacting with our students. Hence, as a token of appreciation on behalf of the SPJIMR family, I request Professor Jha to hand over the mementos to the panelists.
A lot of planning, preparation, and coordination goes into putting up an event of this nature. Samavesh is a student-led event, so for all the enthusiastic participation, all the hard work, all the sleepless nights, and all the patience and the teamwork, a big thank you to all the participants of PGPM 2022 and student-led team of Samavesh.
I now take the opportunity to thank Dr. Varun Nagraj, Dean SPJIMR, Professor Nilen Singh Pawar, Chairperson PGPM, Dr. Sridevi R, Associate Program Head PGPM, Professor Shelja Jha, Area Head Information Management and Analytics, Professor Anil Vaidya, Professor Jyoti Jagasia, Professor Milind Kamath, Mr. Bhishma Chughani, Head Career Services, Ms. Almaz Sheikh, and Ms. Aditi Gadia for the relentless support in pulling all of this together.
Student-led committees are what drives all the activities and events at SPJIMR. Committees help our participants understand how to influence without power, a critical component of teamwork and management. Team Samavesh was composed of the members from various committees. Core team of IM and BA Conclave, Bhuvan, Yasin, Vishal, IACOM members Nidhi and Suvek, members of Marketing and Alumni Relation Committee, Revant, Prakhar, Richa, Mukundan, Ronak and Utsav, volunteers Gauranga, Nilab, Sumit Nibwani, Anurag, the presenters Swarna and Aditya Arora, Shri Ganesh, Sandeep and Ravi for helping them prepare the deck.
Signing off, myself Onkar.
Myself Anshul.
With this, thank you everyone. We close the IM and BA conclave here and invite the panelists, the faculty members and presenters for a photo session on the stage.